I studied the Dutch artist Johannes Vermeer and his portrayals of domestic interiors that focus mainly on the women of the home. Unfortunately, there are still many questions regarding the personal life of Vermeer, so his background is somewhat mysterious. However, what we do know is that Vermeer was born and raised in Delft, a city located in the Netherlands. Vermeer wed a Catholic woman named Catharina. He notably converted to Catholicism upon marrying his wife, an action rare to see in the Protestant north of the Dutch Republic. As you can see on the map, the north and south of the Netherlands were split, with the north remaining Protestant under the Dutch Republic and the south largely Catholic under Spanish rule. Delft lies in the north. The couple lived with Katarina's mother in one home, having some 15 children, 11 of which were still alive when Vermeer passed away. It is unknown who Vermeer's teachers were and who he trained with. There are currently 36 known paintings attributed to Vermeer, some of which are still being actively contested, so the means by which he made a living are vague. Even if we assume that he produced more than 36 paintings in his lifetime, the income made would still be unsubstantial, certainly not enough to live off when considering his family's size. Vermeer died in Delft in 1675 at the young age of 43, leaving his wife and children in debt for unknown reasons. The first piece I'm going to discuss is titled The Lacemaker. Vermeer painted the Lacemaker in 1669. The work is very small, standing smaller than a standard sheet of paper. Vermeer's attention to visual effects in the foreground and natural light that falls on the subject's figure results in an exceptionally intimate and private view of female domestic life from this period. Vermeer was clearly aware of optical theories when painting the Lacemaker, as evident by his blurring of the spilling thread and cushion in the left foreground of the painting. Naturally, when an image is viewed very closely, the thing seated closest to the eye will blur, while the point of focus that's a bit further away will remain crisp. By blurring the contents in front and to the far left of the woman, Vermeer is simulating this type of optical phenomenon. In result, the viewer is pulled even closer to the focal point of the painting, immediately focusing on the figure rather than the busy contents of the table, highlighting her peaceful engagement with the bobbins and pins. Vermeer is most likely able to perceive and map out these minuscule optical distortions in points of light with the use of the camera obscura. Although it is debated upon, his near photographic quality of relaying certain luster and points of focus heavily suggests he used a camera obscura to view an image which he intended to paint. The camera obscura had existed for many centuries preceding the 17th, and its continued use led to the invention of contemporary photography. At its simplest form, this optical device works as a lens which projects an image of a scene or subject onto a screen or wall, which can then be studied and traced from. Typically, the artist would sit inside of a darkened room and study the projected image in great detail. This practice would have allowed Vermeer to observe tiny features of his scenes, perhaps noticing details in lighting that he struggled to identify as a typical viewer. In order to compare a painting to a photograph, great attention must be placed on the illusion of space that is created with perspective geometry and extreme regard to minute detail. In the Lacemaker, despite its inherently small size, Vermeer renders the specific mechanics of a lace-making table with great attention. Although the bobbins and pins are a small part of the overall picture, they are not overlooked. In a similar way, the crowning braid of the woman's hair is not the focal point of the piece, but the pattern remains intricate, crisp, and lifelike. In other portions of the painting, however, Vermeer paints in a contrasting style. He paints loosely and more free, giving the illusion of being out of focus. Looking back on the lines of red thread that erupt from the woman's sewing pillow, this style of free and loose painting is recognized. The natural light falling onto the woman's figure from the far right of the Lacemaker calls attention to her forehead, face, and fingers. The perspective of the scene is zoomed in to remain intimate, only showing the upper half of the woman and her work. There's no window visible, but Vermeer's portrayal of light informs the viewer that one exists to the right of the frame. She's positioned slightly diagonally towards the window, allowing better light to hit her pins and needles, and in consequence, some of the light highlights her face and forehead as well. This practice places an emphasis on the concentration the woman holds while performing her elevated task. There's no undertone of exhaustion or struggle in her face as she remains gazing at her working fingers, but Vermeer still shows value and elegance in her domestic activity. Although this close-up scene of a woman in her home practicing lace making seems simple, Vermeer's genius remains in emphasizing the beauty and detail in a quiet domestic life. The next work focuses on a different and less leisurely form of domestic activity titled The Milkmaid. The Milkmaid was painted in 1660. The subject is a kitchen maid making porridge of some kind by pouring milk from a clay pitcher into a clay bowl. Similar to the Lacemaker, it's a seemingly simple scene. The figure is standing, completely quiet, almost statuesque. As Vermeer often did, he takes a simple and mundane task and elevates it to a subject worthy of great art. Light remains one of Vermeer's most dominant devices as a painter. The light, entering into the room from the window on the far left wall, touches everything it reaches. The light reacts on the maid's face, sitting on the surface of her skin. But Vermeer also introduces hundreds of little dots across her form and the contents of the kitchen table, a practice termed pointillism. These dots, in their varying depth, reflect the way light travels through and across the surfaces of which they lay. The bread on the table, for example, contains the most easily identifiable dots. However, the eye recognizes them as a form of light and texture, giving them a sense of crispness to their edges. This strategy of conveying light through pointillism is typical across the works of Vermeer. The outline of the maid's body to the right is contoured with a thin stream of white, making it stand out against the shadowed background, giving her skirt the appearance of a deeper, saturated blue, and remaining one of his most striking contrasts. Vermeer creates these extreme contrasts by using the presence of light effectively. Light, arguably, is the second subject of the painting. He used complementary hues to optimally showcase highlights and shadows, almost as a means of exaggeration. Unlike the woman who appears in the Lacemaker, the maid in this frame shows signs of labor-filled days. Her arms are thicker and her shoulders are more round. Her hair is tucked under a cap, and the clothes in which she is adorned appear to be a rougher, less expensive fabric, with some seams loose and messily arranged. She pours milk from a jug to a bowl, paralleling the watering of wine, a traditional symbol of temperance. All of these craft a maid of tenacity, hard at work. In the mid-17th century, maids were not commonly portrayed in this fashion. Maids were viewed with reservation, and even household manuals from the period advised mistresses to regard their maids with suspicion. Maids were often pictured in a satirical way, poking fun and exposing them for their believed indecency and conniving practices. Maids were often feared not only for having access to the personal contents of their employer's estate, but for their close relationships with members of the family, specifically regarding the infidelity of husbands. Vermeer's painting suggests a subtle rebuttal to this societal view. His figure does not paint a portrait of laziness, loose sexual prowess, or untrustworthiness. His perspective even suggests against this belief. Rather than looking down upon the servant, the gaze of the frame is fixed slightly below her, elevating her figure. Behind the hard laboring maid, seemingly engrossed in her domestic chores, lays two final and explicit allegories of love, a foot warmer and tiles adorned with Cupid, contradicting while simultaneously referencing Dutch society's mistrust in maids. Another type of work that women engaged in was music making. The music lesson was painted from 1662 to 1665. Inside of a sunlit room, a woman stands while playing a virginal. A man stands next to her and watches and listens intently. Both figures appear quiet in this music-filled space. The music lesson remains one of Vermeer's most calculated compositions. The vanishing point of the painting falls on the woman's sleeve facing the window. The sleeve is bathed in sunlight, highlighting the woman's prominence as the focal point of the painting. A young woman's accomplishments were held of high importance in society. Although they were not traditionally trained to the same degree or level as men, women of high rankings were expected to have knowledge of basic principles such as art and music. On her sleeve, there is a pinhole punched into the canvas. Vermeer would have used threads that he tied to the needle and the canvas, mapping out the lines of linear perspective. The floor plays a large role in the perspective of the painting. The black and white tiles have very strong diagonals, all leading the eye back to the woman as the focal point. Above the virginal rests a mirror, reflecting the woman's face, highlighting her importance to the composition further. The relationship of the man to the side of the woman was debated upon by Vermeer himself. Modern technology has shown that the man was originally painted to be leaning much closer to the woman, and the woman was turned slightly in his direction. Although the female figure faces the back wall in this final composition, the mirror maintains the original turn of her head. Vermeer transformed these figures' poses from active to statuesque, hinting at the permanence yet subtlety of their relationship. The table covered in a patterned rug, the brass lion head chair, and the viol de gamba in the right center of the composition keep the couple closed off from the viewer. In this way, the woman and her teacher are protected by these objects, and Vermeer is able to maintain a sense of privacy for such an intimate scene. Vermeer's work has been regarded as some of the most quality genre paintings from the 17th century, snapshots of ordinary people engaged in ordinary tasks. The subjects had very little variation, almost only depicting women in their homes engaged in traditional tasks. The perspective Vermeer employs in his work gives a sense of intimacy to the mundane scenes, offering a quick and undetected look into a private and once hidden world. Unlike other Baroque artists who painted elaborate narratives of major events, the sense of urgency from Vermeer's paintings catches a quickly fleeting single moment in time. The women avoid any and all means of confrontation, consistently focused on their tasks at hand. Although his paintings are quite small, some being smaller than a standard sheet of paper, they reflect impressive realism and attention to detail, as achieved by his significant regard to light and optical distortions in relation to dimension and space. As a result of his fine craftsmanship, Vermeer produced nearly photographic quality scenes of women caught in a single, private, and intimate moment, elevating domestic activities to subjects worthy of high art. Thank you. Oh,